Here's something most people never notice. The quiet kid in the back of the classroom, the one who never raises their hand, the one teachers describe as no trouble at all. That child is often carrying something invisible. Not laziness, not shyness in the way we usually think about it. Something else entirely. And by the end of this, you might recognize that child in yourself, in someone you love, or in a pattern that has quietly followed you into adulthood without you ever naming it. Think about how a child learns to ask for help. It sounds simple, but it isn't. A child raises their hand, says, "I don't understand," reaches out when they're scared, and waits to see what happens next. If the response is warmth, patience, reassurance, the child learns something powerful. My needs are safe to express. But if the response is irritation, dismissal, or even just a tired sigh, the child learns something else entirely. My needs are a problem. And here is the part that matters most. It does not take repeated trauma for this lesson to take hold. Sometimes it takes only a handful of moments, scattered across childhood, for a child to quietly conclude that the safest thing to do is stop asking altogether. Psychologists have a name for what happens next. It's called learned self-reliance, and it develops as a direct response to what researchers call inconsistent or unresponsive caregiving. When a child's emotional bids, their small reaches for comfort or guidance, go unanswered often enough, the brain begins to treat those bids as unnecessary risks. Why expose a need if the need will not be met? So the child adapts. They stop signaling distress. They stop asking questions even when confused. They become, in the eyes of every adult around them, remarkably easy. And here is where it becomes fascinating from a psychological standpoint. This isn't a failure of the child's personality. It's an extraordinarily efficient adaptation. The developing brain is, above all else, built for survival within its environment. If expressing needs leads to disappointment, and silence leads to peace, the brain will choose silence every time. Not because silence feels good, but because silence feels safer than the alternative. Now pause here for a moment. Think about someone you know, maybe even yourself, who has always been described as independent, low maintenance, someone who never complains. Where do you think that trait actually came from? Was it built in comfort, or was it built quietly, out of necessity? There's another layer to this that researchers in attachment theory have spent decades studying. Children who learn early that their needs are inconvenient often develop what's known as a deactivating strategy, a kind of internal switch that suppresses the urge to seek support, even when support is available and even when it's desperately needed. This isn't a conscious choice. It happens automatically, the same way a hand pulls away from something hot before the brain even registers pain. The nervous system learns the lesson so thoroughly that the adult version of that child can feel physically uncomfortable, almost itchy, at the idea of saying, "I need help," even in situations where help is freely offered. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because on the surface, this looks like strength. It looks like maturity. It looks like someone who has it together. And in many ways, it is a kind of strength, just not the kind anyone intended to build. The quiet kid grows into the adult who handles everything, who shows up for everyone else, who is the first person friends call in a crisis. And almost nobody asks who that person calls when they are the one in crisis. Here's something worth sitting with. There's a concept in psychology called the mask of competence. It describes people who function so well on the outside, who manage responsibilities, careers, and relationships so smoothly that everyone around them assumes they are fine. Always. The mask is so convincing that even the person wearing it sometimes forgets it's a mask. But underneath, there's often a quiet exhaustion, a sense of carrying things alone that were never meant to be carried alone. And the cruel irony is that the better someone becomes at hiding this, the less likely anyone is to ever ask if they're okay. There's also something deeper happening here, something connected to how humans form trust. Trust isn't built through grand gestures. It's built through small, repeated moments of vulnerability, followed by safety. A person says, "I'm struggling," and someone responds with care. That tiny exchange, repeated over time, is what teaches the nervous system that connection is safe. But if those moments never happened, or happened rarely, the foundation for that kind of trust simply never gets built. Not because the person doesn't want connection, they often want it more than anyone realizes. But wanting something and feeling safe enough to reach for it are two very different things. This is why so many people who grew up as the quiet one describe a strange kind of loneliness in adulthood, even when surrounded by people who care about them. It isn't the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being known only for the parts of themselves that function, while the parts that struggle remain permanently out of view. Researchers sometimes call this relational invisibility, the experience of being present in someone's life without ever being truly seen by them. But here's where the story shifts, because this is not a fixed condition, it's a pattern, and patterns, no matter how old, can be interrupted. The same psychological flexibility that allowed a child to adapt to silence as a survival strategy is the same flexibility that allows an adult to learn something new. The nervous system isn't static. It's constantly updating itself based on new evidence. It's just that most people never give it the chance to gather that evidence. What would it look like to gather it? Often it starts incredibly small. Not a dramatic confession, not a breakdown, just one honest sentence to one trusted person. Today wasn't actually fine, and then watching, carefully, what happens next. For someone who has spent a lifetime managing alone, even this small act can feel disproportionately difficult, almost unsafe. That discomfort isn't a warning sign. It's simply the sensation of doing something unfamiliar, something the nervous system has never been given the chance to practice. And slowly, with enough small moments like this, something begins to recalibrate. The old belief that needing things leads to disappointment starts to meet new evidence that doesn't fit. Not every time, and not perfectly, but enough times to matter. This is, in essence, what psychologists mean when they talk about healing attachment patterns. It isn't about erasing the past. It's about giving the present enough new information to write a different story. So here's the final thought. If you've ever been the quiet one, the easy one, the one who never asks, that wasn't a flaw in your character. It was an adaptation, built carefully and quietly by a younger version of you who was doing the best they could with what they had. But adaptations can evolve, and sometimes the most quietly courageous thing a person can do isn't holding everything together, it's allowing, just once, for someone else to see that they don't have to.